Welcome to the show, Jonathan. Hey, will you please let people know a little bit about your background? I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation today, and also include, what are you up to today? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that office there. I know you're busy.
First off, thanks for having me on, David. I appreciate it. And I think it'll be a fun conversation. I did get a chance to see some of your prior recordings, so that's great. So what are we up to today? I'll start there. It's sort of business as usual for us. I mean, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but I've been in the financial services world for 25 years and been meditating for 26 years. And so I think that'll be a large part of the conversation today, and how those two things intertwine. I refer to everything we do as behavioral wealth advice. And what that means is, whether we're presenting publicly, or we're serving private clients, or we're working with employees of the companies we do 401k stuff for, we're always planning oriented and we're always educating. Where most advisors are market focused and performance driven, we are goal focused and planning driven. And that's what we always do. And so times like this, we just revert back to the plan. That's like our breath.
Yeah. No, I don't know whether we go into the market or whatever, but I'm really curious about, let's dive into that piece of the meditation and the financial advice type of thing, and how those two go together.
So that actually, I can highlight those with a story about my son. And this is something that happened to him in first grade. So he was on the playground, first grade. He and a friend had found a dead spider, and they were going to bury this spider. And in the process of burying the spider, there's a little girl who's, it's first grade. She's spinning and she's dancing and she's singing. And Eli says, "Hey, come on, this is really serious. Can you go do that someplace else?" And she's like, "No, you can't make me." So Eli picks up a rock, where this is going, and he throws it at her and hits her square in the nose.
Oh.
I'm skipping to the end. Lots of blood, no permanent damage, which is good. But that night I asked him, "What are you thinking? What was going on through your head?" And he didn't register the emotional response in his brain before he registered the activity. Right? Yeah. So that's where mindfulness and money come together, actually. We often are moved by what's going on in the world, and we shouldn't be. We should be able to go, okay, what does my plan say I'm supposed to be doing here? And go back to the plan. That's why I refer to my plan as my breath.
Okay, so we're going to have a lot of fun. So this assumes the fact that somebody actually has a plan in the first place.
Bingo. That is very important. First place.
So when you're talking about how your son or an individual today, that plan, we're operating as individuals. I mean, your focus is money, but what about someone's plan as far as marriage, career, schooling, responsibility? What about their personal values?
All of those things can be, I believe, all of those things can be benefited with mindfulness training. And it's very simple, actually. The world throws things at us. We don't know what the world is going to throw at us. And so sometimes when I walk into my living room and, I've left something on the floor that I shouldn't have left on the floor, and my wife points out that I've left something on the floor, my immediate reaction might be, why are you always on top of me for this? That kind of thing. But if I really think about it, I can realize that there's a much better way to manage that scenario. And that's true when you're parenting. It's true in your relationships. It's true in business. It's true when you're investing. What's the goal is better outcomes. What are the things I can actually do to affect better outcomes?
It's interesting because I'm just completing a second series of courses by Danny Silk on relationships. And one of the things he points out is that you have to mentally align yourself so you're always choosing the relationship first. Mm-hmm. Whereas in survival mode of fear or flight, fight or flight, if I'm in a fight, then I choose I want to win the battle versus retain the relationship, or in flight, I want to protect myself rather than retain the relationship. So if we're talking about mindfulness, you brought up meditation. So how does that fit in? What does that look like for people?
So, there's lots of different forms of meditation. There are 3 or 4 very well-known meditation apps that are completely secular. And so I don't want to make this religious in any way. I happen to be, I would profess to be Buddhist, so I happen to follow a philosophy as well. But you can sit down, and this is scientific research. If you sit down, stare at a wall, monitor your breath, when you lose the breath and you get attracted by a thought or a sound or a pain in your knee or whatever, and you bring yourself back to the breath, you're practicing meditation. And if you do that for 10 minutes a day, in 60 days, you will actually increase the size of your frontal lobe and you will decrease the size of your amygdala. And that's where that fight or flight resides. And so meditation is a practice of bringing mindfulness front and center.
So if I'm understanding you, it gives you the ability to be more intentional in how you respond rather than instinctively react.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then now I have very little understanding on meditation, but I have looked at it a little bit in the past year. And I think maybe you can help me. So there's kind of some different, as you mentioned, there's different styles. And one style, the Buddhist style is more of a clearing of the mind, isn't it? But then there's or emptying of the mind. Is that what it is? Please correct me. Don't worry about it. I don't know what I'm talking about. But then there's some other styles where you're actually trying to focus on certain things, aren't there?
So I would say that all of that exists within Buddhism as well as many other places. So
okay.
There is this idea of it's impossible to clear the mind. No one is ever trying to clear the mind. That's the point is to recognize how impossible that is.
Thank God. I thought it was only me.
No, and that's when I talk to people who don't meditate, they go, "Oh, I could never meditate. I can't sit still for that long." And I'm like, actually, you can sit still. It's just you can't quiet your mind, and that should be a lesson. You can't quiet your mind, and you never know what your mind's going to dredge up. So maybe that's a muscle you should flex. You should work on that muscle, right? Because if you can't manage the stuff that's coming in, then you have to be able to pick and choose what are those things I'm going to focus on, and that's where mindfulness training really lets you go, okay, that doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This I should focus on. And it lets you be active in the process of what are you thinking about?
Yeah. So, and ideally it would be great if each family could try to instill these habits, starting with the parents and then pass them on. But are there any places in the world where this is being reinforced? Notice I'm not saying taught, although obviously it's probably taught also as part of the equation, but it's being reinforced in certain schools as part of the daily practice for kids.
Of course. I mean, I'm sure globally it exists, but I'm in Berkeley, California. So it's in my kids' school. And actually you said this would be great if parents could do this and then teach their kids. The reverse is actually often true. Kids are actually running into this in school, and they'll spend 2 minutes sitting on the floor and they'll call it quiet reflection, or they'll call it something else. But then they'll come home and they'll say, go home and show your parents how to do this, because we're probably more stressed than our kids are generally. And so we would benefit a lot from it, but we're not going to, if you're 35, 40, 50 years old right now, you're not going to run into this just in your daily life. So your kids might bring that up to you, and it's a great time to be present and pay attention to what they're bringing.
Yeah, I grew up in Marin. I've lived almost all my life in Marin and went to Berkeley, but didn't stay there long. I used to call it Berkeley, and like to jokingly refer myself as from the left coast of the country, although I'm more conservative. But I could see that in Berkeley. But we look at you mentioned the messaging we get each day, and the way you didn't use this term, but bombarded. And one of the things that's been so disappointing in this quote unquote pandemic is that people can be so mean and bullying on both sides. Yep. And just driven by fear. There was a situation I heard of the other day where there was a certain forum and somebody was getting upset about somebody else. It was actually a realtors forum, and they were really putting the guy down. And this other guy, who's a thoughtful guy, said, I know this guy and he's a good guy. He's a reasonable guy. We may not agree with what he did, but, let's at least be nice about it. And then the attack dogs just attacked him, just started ripping him to shreds. And he just said something very calm, very nice. And I'm struck by your whole approach of what would happen in our nation if we actually tried to teach this approach and made it, irrespective of the religious beliefs, because as you have said, it can be incorporated into virtually whatever religion you choose. And we're fortunate to have freedom of religion here. And also then you take that and you move it on to money. You're talking about mindful money. What if we taught people how to manage money? This economic crisis probably wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. Both in terms of the shaming that I see, whether it's in social media or in live events. And I think that things wouldn't be so bad either now, or, think back to 2008, 2009, that wouldn't have been as bad if people had a different relationship with money. And, not only do we not teach mindfulness, but we don't really teach anything about finance in any part of our lives. And we would benefit so much, not just with financial literacy, but just some basic economic literacy, which we don't have. And unless somebody pursues that as a career or as an interest or a passion of their own, they don't run into that just day to day. That's a problem.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So our kids are graduating with being taught things they're never going to use, and they've constantly forgotten. And yet you could take money management as one of many, quite frankly, I would refer to it as a soft skill.
Yeah.
Although it has technical aspects to it, hard skill. But if they could walk away with that and how to get along with others and that type of thing, but it'd be a totally different country. Now, I'm kind of curious, you call your organization or, Mindful Money. Talk to us more about that.
Well, so we have actually, currently I have two organizations. One is Mindful Money, one is DeYoe Wealth Management. And you're very prescient. I don't think I said this, but it's all becoming Mindful Money. And that's, I've had DeYoe Wealth Management for almost 20 years now. And that was just because, I'm a lone guy. I split off from Wall Street. I have my practice, and this is 2001. What do I call this? Okay, my last name, Wealth Management. And I went with that, and it's not that I've regretted it ever since, but it doesn't carry with it a message that Mindful Money carries. And Mindful Money has always been the philosophy. It's always been what I do. But I needed to name it something, so I named it that. And now, fast forward 20 years, it doesn't work as well as I'd like it to. But you maybe know this in sort of management consulting, changing the name of a company that's like known and respected in an area, that's hard to do. Like everybody knows DeYoe Wealth Management. So I think this is the year where you see, and the website's being designed and all that kind of stuff. But this is the year you see the launch of Mindful Money as the universal brand for us.
So when we apply this to entrepreneurs, we have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to this show. So when we look at this crisis, it's not going to be the last crisis we face. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah.
We've seen these before. Now we have some nuances to it, and particularly this very toxic division and isolation of people. And I'm very concerned about factions and the brutalities. When we talk about managing our money to remove that stressor from our lives, it's not a light bulb we turn on and all of a sudden it's fixed, particularly when we made some mistakes. What's some of the advice you're giving people, whether it's entrepreneurs or individuals, as to how to be moving forward through this in a calmer, more intentional way, not only to resolve current issues, but to prepare for the future?
So at the baseline of everything that we do, I have 3 rules. The first rule is, and this, when I say it, you're like, oh, that's obvious. And it is obvious, but not everyone does it. The first rule is, whether you're an entrepreneur or just, someone with a job, spend less than you make. Rule number 1, spend less than you make. And that gives you, and if you think about, if you did that for 5 years preceding Corona, then you have for 5 years created a kitty that you can rely on during Corona, right? So spending less than you make is actually, it's absolutely fundamental to your long-term financial success. So that's rule number 1.
Now, can we stay there for a moment?
Please.
Because I agree with you. It sounds simple, sounds straightforward. It's like, duh. Okay. I mean, anybody can do a spreadsheet or use Quicken or whatever you want to use and figure out. But what are some of the common tripping points, not tipping points, tripping points where people, kind of procrastinate? I'll get there later, or they overlook some pretty obvious things that are gouging their budget.
Wow. There's so much of this. I think we have a hard thing. There's two sort of fundamental things here. First, we confuse wants and needs on a regular basis. We're always confusing wants and needs. And I'll just give you a quick example. We had a client who, we're looking at their budget, and they're someone that came to us as a sort of a pro bono-ish case. And we're looking through their budgets, and we're like, why, you're alone. Why are you spending $300 a month on cable? And well, 200 of the 300 was the Lifetime channel or something like that. And she was like, there was no way she was going to give up her Lifetime channel. And I get it, but you have to say, okay, do I really want to do this, or do I want to retire when I'm 65 or wait till I'm 70? And so this is the third of the issues: spend less than you make. The third is make sure you have a financial plan. And if you have that financial plan, then, getting from here to there, you get to know your future self and what your future self might want. But, we don't defer gratification to our future selves. We want it right now. And if we confuse our wants and our needs, and we can't defer gratification to our future selves, we just don't get there. I think I've never met somebody who said, I don't have enough to save, who, once we looked at their budget, we didn't find something to save. I've always found a way to save. It's just people don't see it.
It's interesting, this lockdown, and as if I'm counting correctly, we're on 8 weeks up here in Roseville.
Yep.
And which to me is just insane. But it's actually been kind of eye-opening when you stop driving as much and you stop spending as much, and maybe you can't go get your Starbucks every week because they've been closed. Our Starbucks here just opened yesterday. And of course this is actually a really strange place because there's 3 Starbucks within a block of each other.
Not so strange. Very normal.
It's like crazy. And they all do well. It's like one's in a Safeway, one's in this, then there's a full-fledged one in the Safeway parking lot, and then there's one diagonally. It's not. Anyway, but the other thing that occurs to me, that people, because they want it all now, exactly, they don't think about it. But if you look at our immigrants, legal or illegal, okay, and there are 8 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment,
yep,
okay, and there are ways to save if that's your primary objective. So I think that goes back to your mindfulness. If you really can separate the wheat from the chaff, what do I really need versus what I want?
Yep.
And then, as you mentioned, the plan. Well, forgive me, I'm getting in the way. So I see what you're saying. So, okay, so I'm going to buy into, I got to spend less than I make. Okay, so I'm there. What's number 2?
Thing? Number 2. And this I'll get emotional responses to this. I'll get pushback. I'll get questions, even some accusations on this. This is fundamental. You have to become an owner. And I don't care how you do that. There's a couple different ways to do it. You could start your own company, and even if you don't succeed, but if you start your own company, you get to understand what a balance sheet is, how a P&L works. And if you understand that, you can kind of figure out, okay, I got to pull this lever, I got to pull that lever. This is how I can become successful at this. And if you invest in your own enterprise, that can be an incredibly successful thing. In fact, I think the majority of the wealth that I have met in my lifetime has been come from people who have developed their own enterprise. But let's say you don't have that in you. You can be an owner lots of different ways. You don't have that in you. You can't start your own business. You just don't have an idea, whatever. Anyone with almost no money can begin with a small brokerage account with $100 a month and invest in the great companies in the United States and the world. And if you do that on a regular basis, you will see your wealth position improve. And I don't care how, socioeconomically you are disadvantaged. If you do that and I'm not talking about, we're not buying this today, selling that, buying something else tomorrow. I'm saying buying a very, very broad index and just keep buying it and buying it and buying it and buying it. Never sell it. Don't think about it. Over time, you are going to kill it. You're going to do so well. But again, going back to mindfulness, there's going to be so much stimulus for you to go back, to sell. The fear, Corona is going to, oh my God, is the market going to recover? It always recovers. It's always going to go back to normal. We're always going to find the solution. But in the middle of it, everyone's always going to tell you that it's never going to happen. The call I had just before this was with a client who's selling a piece of real estate and saying, Jonathan, I understand everything you say, and I can't commit to buying, the great companies in the United States and the world today because all the GDP numbers and all the employment numbers are going to be horrible for the next 2 quarters. And I ask, 2 quarters? You've got 30 years of life in front of you. What do you care about the next 2 quarters? Like, why does that matter? Buy, invest, and just hold and keep on investing.
So I'm going to agree, disagree, and then also bring something else into it. So I would assume you've read this, but it's a very simple thing. I first read a pamphlet and then read the book, The Richest Man in Babylon.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so old classic.
I thought I remember it.
Yeah, so well, you don't remember it? So the basis of the story is a young man wants to learn how to be rich, so he goes and visits the richest man in Babylon. And the richest man in Babylon says, well, the thing you have to do is you have to pay yourself first. So take 10% of whatever you make, set it aside for investment. And you never touch the principal. And so he makes investments. So the young guy says, got it, no problem. He runs off, starts saving his money. A buddy of his says, hey, I'm going to buy some diamonds. We're going to make a ton of money. You want in on this? And he says, oh, yeah, that sounds great. So he does that. And of course, his buddy loses all the money. So he goes back to the rich guy, says, I lost all my money. I did what you said. And the rich guy says, well, what you need to do is you need to invest in something you understand. So only invest in the things that you understand. Don't spend the principal, keep reinvesting, and it will grow for you. And if you really want to maximize the growth, don't spend your earnings out of it either. Just let it all grow. So that was one piece that I think is consistent with where we agree, where you set aside the funds and you start investing and you have some ownership. You've seen it with some people. We had a couple in Nevada where I used to live who started, I think, tiny cakes. They were like little cupcakes. Started out of their home, they grew the business. Now they have their own little retail and they do parties and but it started with something she loved to do. Yep. And she was really good at it, So that's one thing. We're in agreement there, right? That's a good path. Sure. You want to add to that? I mean, you know a lot more about it than I do.
No, I like it. And that's right out of Peter Lynch's, invest in what you know. And I agree with that to a point. That we can only know so much. So if I'm talking to kids, I talk Apple and Disney and right. So because they know that and they'll understand what that means.
Yeah.
I think that there are a couple rules, long-term investing rules that involve diversification. And so having a lot, having it broadly diversified can protect us for that circumstance where the one company that we know the best, that we love, ends up not existing anymore, right? So diversification is important, but invest in what you know, which may be just U.S. companies, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah. So, and I'm also differentiating that on the one hand, you said get ownership. So an ownership would be like you own a business, you start a business, you do something. I know a guy in Georgia, he totally knows guitars and he can buy and sell guitars at a profit every month. Okay. It's a sideline, whatever. The other portion of it now, as I mentioned to you before we got on, I did 5 years on the stock exchange in San Francisco when it existed. Now it's a fitness club, if it ever reopens. And the other piece is when you go to someone like yourself and you're going to invest and you're diversifying, you have so much maybe in your own thing, but now you need to diversify because, I mean, look at this COVID. We have some businesses aren't going to open and they didn't do anything wrong. Okay. So you diversify. I think how would you go about, rather than investing on your own? I don't like blindly going into mutual funds. This is just my opinion. And I do like to invest in things I understand. There are market ups and downs, but how do you go about choosing someone like yourself where you can be confident? I'm exactly what you said in the beginning. I'm going to go with someone of integrity who's not trying to sell me something. They're investing in what they truly believe in and what they're investing to. And they have a track record so I can have some confidence. How do I choose that?
That is so incredibly hard. I mean, because there isn't, the industry does a really good job of hiding malfeasance and parading someone that's not brilliant as brilliant. So there's a ton of lists. There's a ton of ways you can actually research this. I think the fundamental thing is you want someone that you can sit across the table from face to face. I think you want a human. I think you want someone who is, and this is probably the number one thing, you want someone who is a fiduciary. And I'm sure you know what a fiduciary is, but just for the folks listening, a fiduciary is someone who legally has to put your interests above their own. And there's different elements of that, but that's the fundamental aspect of it. Usually that gets you out of someone that's incentivized by commission, or someone that is going to sell you something that pays them more or isn't quite appropriate for you. And then you want to make sure that that person is going to ask you all kinds of questions. It's not here's my money, invest. It's here's my money and all my cash flows and all the information about my goals and my hopes and my dreams. How should I put this to work so I make those hopes and dreams become reality? It shouldn't just be, oh, here's $10,000, go buy something for me and help me make money. It's not about making money. It's about reaching those hopes and dreams and making the lifestyle you want to have happen. So I think fiduciary, I think gathering information, understanding the person, and you'll know when you go talk to them if this is that kind of person, and having a planning orientation. If you have a planning, or if you're planning driven, you can't be market driven, and being market driven just simply won't work. No one can outguess this thing. It's going to do well long term. I have no idea what's going to do well tomorrow. So planning driven, not market driven, and fiduciary. I think those are the biggest keys.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think what you have an underlying advice there that you're saying, you also got to listen to your gut. Yeah. And be prepared to ask some questions and ask some tough questions.
And Google questions to ask financial advisors. I mean, definitely do that.
Yeah.
There could be 50 of them. Just Google them and ask those questions.
Yeah, good point. Now, I want to go back to one other comment. I hate to, you're really leading into the plan because the plan is going to drive this thing. But I have one other thing I'd like to get your opinion on. And that is, you mentioned early on, you want somebody to own something. It's so awesome that in America, we get to go own stuff. We get to build stuff. And I would suggest, you brought up this type of person who, for whatever reason, isn't comfortable with that much risk or, stepping out in front. And I'm curious about your opinion of, then instead, maybe that person might look for a business they understand, something they love, hopefully, and find someone who they can partner with, or maybe just simply for a period of time, be mentored by. Go and serve that person. It may not provide a huge return financially in that 3 to 5 years of schooling you're going to get by seeing how they do it, but then it might give you the ability to own or partially own something in the future. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is that wrong track, right track?
No, I think that's fantastic. If you're not ready to do it yourself, find someone who's going to do it and will take you under their wing. I think mentoring is actually one of the things that's missing in I don't know if it's our culture, but in the people I know, you don't see much mentoring. And I've got a really close friend of mine who runs and this is not sexy. He runs a retail game store. He runs that game store in Concord, California, and he treats every one of his employees as people that that may eventually grow up and start their own businesses. And he shows them how he makes ordering decisions and how he makes, how you face things on the shelves and why these small pieces are behind the register and teaches them and trains them. And he treats them like family members. It's really, really cool to see how he's training these folks. And he's had one person that worked as his manager grow up and leave the company, and actually he's now a manager at ACD, which is one of the biggest distributors in the gaming industry. And he's had another woman who went on to study marketing in college. So by mentoring people, you vastly improve their lives. And from the reverse, by having a mentor, man, it can make all the difference. Yeah.
And just building on that, something I wasn't even thinking of, but I just encourage anyone who goes that route that, I heard a guy speak decades ago, about a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And he said, you need to be in mentoring relationship where you have someone who's more senior to you that you can learn from and gain from, And then in the opposite direction, you need to be investing your life in someone below you and mentoring them as you're learning. And don't forget that piece where if you get the opportunity to go and be mentored, or maybe you're ready to be a mentor now, invest in other people. I find every mentor I speak with gets as much out of the relationship as the mentee.
For sure.
Have you seen that? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Rotarian, and as a Rotarian, we mentor folks at Cal students, which, frankly, they're at Cal. They're already, they're going to be fine. But it's, they have social, financial, they've got, study questions that it's kind of bizarre, some of the questions you get, but I've learned so much from a Cal student. It's an excellent relationship. It goes both ways. And this triggered this thought in me. So I think about 15 years ago, I did two things, and I committed to two things that were really, really important. One of them was I got myself a coach, and the other one was my own health. But the first one, getting a coach, I look at that as a mentor, right? So having a coach, someone that I can ask questions to, that's in my industry, and I basically said, okay, how do you do this? He said, this is how I do this. And so I said, I'm going to do it that way. And I owe a ton of success to my coach and to my mentors.
That's great. Okay. So we're going to move on to number 3, the plan. So, okay. Take us there.
Why is that important? So I do this in a talk. I put up, and I give a presentation, and you got data points, and you got bullet points, and a bunch of stuff up there. There's one slide I put up there. It's just a long tunnel. It's a long, dark tunnel with a light at the end of it. And if you think about the light at the end of the tunnel, no matter if you're graduating from college, if you're recovering from a bad financial circumstances, if you're, wherever you are, life is going to smack you. There is no way to avoid life smacking you. When life smacks you, how do you stay on, what's your true north? How do you stay on the path? Now, if you don't have a path, it's incredibly difficult to stay on the path. But if you have a path, and if you have a plan, if you have something you've looked at and said, okay, if I save this amount and I invest it in this way, I can expect some volatility. I can expect some craziness, but I know I'll get to where I'm going 20 years from now, 30 years from now, if I just do these very simple things. And then 3 years into my 30-year plan, Corona hits. What do I do differently? Well, I'm scared, I'm nervous. My gut reaction is to do something that's not good for me. But if I have a plan, I can look back at the plan, and the plan tells me what I'm supposed to be doing. I ignore the noise. I continue forward with my plan. I continue with the behaviors that I know with the trade-offs that I know I've wanted to make. I've agreed to make these trade-offs. I know how this works long-term. It builds in volatility. It understands that there's going to be zigs and zags in the world, and they're going to be unpredictable. It gets me to my goals. I go back to that thing that I know has already reviewed the future possibilities, and I follow it.
Well, and this also reinforces what you were saying about mindfulness.
Yep.
Because you have to have that calm and the intention. I have a question for you. How often should they be looking at their plan?
This is very personal. I've got one client who every month wants to sit down and talk and review the plan, and that's you don't need to do that, unless, and this is where it gets interesting, if you're about to make a really big decision, and by looking at the plan on a more regular basis before you make that big decision, it gives you the comfort in the decision you're about to make. Look at it as often as you want, but there's a point where after you reviewed it, once a year or twice a year for a period of time, you don't need to review it as much anymore. I think definitely always review it at least once a year, because things change and things are different. But just before retirement, maybe once a quarter. Many times folks are just entering, for us, we're retirement income planners. That's kind of what we do the most. But in a retirement income plan, everything revolves around the date of retirement. If you retire too early, you run out of money. If you retire too late, you may get to leave a bigger legacy. So that's the final lever you can pull, is when you retire. And so clarity around that moment might involve lots of conversations, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And it strikes me, though, and I'm asking you candidly, correct me if you think I'm wrong. It strikes me that this overall plan that is 10, 20, 30 years out, yeah, you don't have to look at it as often, but those sub plans or those metrics that you're trying to live by to achieve that overall plan, wouldn't it be that you're going to be looking at those much more frequently, depending on how they affect your day-to-day, weekly decisions in your business or in your career?
So I guess that one of the questions I would have in that is what exactly are you, what metrics are you thinking you're going to be monitoring on a weekly basis that will cause you to change something you do from a planning perspective?
So why don't we do this? I'll throw it back at you. Give me the general characteristics, maybe 1, 2, 3 key metrics that somebody's got as a 20-year, 30-year plan.
So when I'm thinking about a plan, I'm thinking that there's sort of 3 pieces of the structure, right? What are the value of the assets? What are the inflows? What are the outflows? And forward that, project that forward for years. Okay. So yeah, you ought to look at your assets and your income and your expenses on a semi-annual, annual basis. As you approach big decision points, like, okay, my son just got into Harvard, we're not going to get any aid. Does this make sense? Does it make sense to spend $110,000 a year to send my son to college at Harvard when he can go to Cal, assuming he can get into Cal if he got into Harvard, which we shouldn't assume. But if he gets into Cal and it's $15,000 a year and he lives at home, I got to make that decision. What does it do to the long-term plan but I don't think you need to review that on a monthly basis. You can kind of you can look at that and see what that effect will be if you look at it one time.
Yeah, I think and maybe I'm giving myself too much leeway here. I think we are pretty consistent, because you're saying there have to be certain inflows and then the outflows. And because those are defined, those are really kind of something you're checking on a monthly basis or weekly basis. And it's like a 5-second check, okay, nothing happened to my income. I'm on track. Okay, my expenses are lining up in Quicken or whatever. We're on track. Boom, I'm done. It's not really the strategic, consideration and then making a major decision, like you're saying, moving forward. My problem is I find most people fall down by deviating from the long-term plan in little pieces, bad habits, procrastination, violating the objectives in little ways. They're not a big decision. I can think about it later. And then, oops, wait a minute. How did I get here?
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons you want an accountability partner. Even if that person's not checking every week alongside you, is if I sit down with somebody once every 6 months and they go, yeah, the bathroom remodel was going to be $100. It turned out to be $150,000. And I can point out to them, okay, that makes sense. I understand you wanted that really nice tile and the heated floors is what you're going for. But remember how last year you went in to buy a new car and it ended up being an $80,000 car instead of a $50,000 car? And how the year before that, there's a trend here, and that trend is going to keep you off plan. And every time we have this review session, you're getting further and further away from your objectives because you're not saving the amount you're supposed to save. So having an accountability partner means you're letting somebody check you on this. And then it's up to, it's really up to the client to change the behavior, but I'm going to announce that, hey, you got to change this behavior or change the goals. If you're going to keep doing this, then let's just push retirement out 5 years. And you say that and they go, whoa. Like I don't want to do that. I'm like, okay, now we have some friction. Now we can work with this.
Notice it takes some friction to work with it.
It does.
So Jonathan, this has been great. So how can people learn more about you, your services, and what you got going on? Because it sounds like you get some really wise advice people need to consider.
The best place to start at first is just to go to mindful.money, which is the website. You can also check out the book. It's on Amazon. And I presume that somewhere in this, when you put this up there, there'll be a link. And that link
there will be.
Money. Yeah. That'd be the way to go. Mindful.money.
Definitely. Super. Hey, well, I thank you for this conversation. I could literally go on for at least another hour which we did schedule, but I'm going to try to stick within our standard timeframes. And I know you got other things to do, but I want to thank you so much. This has been very interesting. I'm going to check out your stuff too. I have read some of it as far as to prepare, but I want to dive deeper. So thank you
Great.
very much for your insights.
And thanks for having me, David. I loved it.